My name is Patrick Lowe. I'm the Chief Economist at the World Trade Organization. We are an international trade agreement amongst a highly diverse and quite large membership of 150 members. So ours is an agreement. We're not a funding institution of any kind. We're a place where governments come to talk about trade policy, to agree on rules about trade policy, and to agree about the conditions of access to each other's markets. I expect the Commission to take a fresh look at some of the pressing issues facing the multilateral trading system today, and the trading system more generally, international trade relations more generally. In many ways we're at turning points in the conduct and organization of international trade, and this is an opportune moment for some knowledgeable outsiders, most of the Commission are outsiders, to give some new insights, some fresh insights, different ways of looking at things. It's a multidisciplinary body, and that has huge advantages too. Trade and increasing integration through trade is one of the key features of globalization today. So cooperation is at a premium. And the challenge we have is to make sure that this is a kind of cooperation from which we get buy-in from all nations, all interests. And that is very easy to say and rather hard to do. Interests are diverse, priorities are different. And the question is, how can we bring all these diverse interests together in a way that leads to mutual benefit among the cooperating parties? Bilateralism and regionalism more generally has exploded exponentially in the last decade or two, and it does raise the question of what the role of the multilateral trading system, the so-called non-discriminatory basis of the multilateral trading system, is obviously challenged by regional and bilateral agreements. But these regional and bilateral agreements exist for a reason. Governments have seen it in their interests to strike these agreements. I think our job as the, if you like, the core focal point of international trade relations among almost all nations is to play for coherence, to try to ensure as much coherence as possible in these different arrangements, to try to see if we can make a contribution to minimizing the costs involved in crisscrossing arrangements, often competing in many ways. A situation where a pair of countries will negotiate something, and then one of those countries will then negotiate something with somebody else, and that will immediately depreciate what was negotiated in the first agreement, and all the mess that follows from complex networks of rules of origin and differentiated conditions of market access. Even though it's clear that governments see value in making these agreements, I think there is an awareness that they're not always the best way of carrying forward harmonious and integrated international trade relations of the kind that the WTO seeks to promote. On the other hand, it's a lot easier sometimes to make agreements among a few countries rather than try to get a universe of countries to agree on things. I think one of the big challenges for the WTO is to ensure that these don't become excessively discriminatory against outsiders. As far as possible, they should be open and inclusive, not exclusive and discriminatory. Even if in their fundamental nature they have some discrimination in them, can we look to a future where this crisscrossing network of agreements will eventually become more generalized into multilaterally oriented agreements, where we'll be able to eliminate some of these efficiency costs and difficulties associated with overlapping and potentially excluding agreements. Some developing countries have gone quite a long way in establishing regional agreements amongst themselves, but I think many of them rely very heavily on the multilateral trading system as a bedrock of international rules, where governments make pre-commitments to certain types of policy behavior. I think many developing countries would be quite concerned if they thought that regional arrangements were simply going to substitute for the multilateral trading system. So I think they look to the multilateral trading system to provide stability and continuity and a certain degree of predictability that is not necessarily present in regional arrangements. I think the relative weights of negotiating influence and power are quite different within regional agreements, especially if they're between developed and developing countries, and in the multilateral setting. So I think developing countries need to look at both in order to see where they can extract the maximum benefit. It's difficult to put a very clear meaning on the notion of equity in trade relations other than that we create a level playing field in which there is equality of opportunity in some sense. I think that's what the system seeks to do. Of course, there are many things that can legitimately be criticized about the system in relation to whether or not the rules are fair. But over time, I think there's an evolutionary process by which the rules do become more balanced in the direction of serving the interests of a growing number of countries that have real stakes in international trade.